We're so excited that you're here with us. I want to welcome our partners, MorningStar affiliates, however you've tuned in with us tonight, and just thank you that you're here. It's a pretty serious subject, and we, again, wanted to just get some timely information to you. And I have with me tonight Marc Nuttle. Marc, thanks for coming and being a part of this.
Glad to be here.
What do I say about Marc Nuttle? Widely recognized economist, lawyer, and you've worked with such credible campaigns as Pat Robinson's campaign, senior advisor with George Bush, and you worked with Ronald Reagan, and you're based in Norman, Oklahoma, Christian lawyer and beautiful family.
Yes.
Thanks again for coming and being a part here.
Married 40 years. My wife, Ann, have 2 daughters and 6 grandchildren.
Wow.
We're really blessed.
Great. And, just an incredible background. And we don't want to take too much time in introduction because we have a lot of things that we want to cover today. And they are so timely in light of, the stock market, what's going on. And Marc, let me just start off by saying you've been speaking about these things for quite some time. This is not something you're jumping on the bandwagon with. You've been speaking these things. Even at Reagan's 100th birthday celebration, you began to speak about these. Talk about, the history and what you've been saying.
Dave, we actually started this research last September before the elections. I mean, how real is the debt problem in the United States? What really has to be done? How serious are the deficits? Is this political hyperbole? Is it real? We began the research and really published first in about October. You're right, I addressed at the Capitol at the Reagan 100th anniversary, the findings, which are that there's a point where you can't continue to borrow or spend in an affordable manner, and where you net gain money that you put in your hand. And so we talked about that. Senator Tom Coburn from Oklahoma, my senator, has been working on this likewise. We've been coordinating with him as best as we can. A group of economists, as early as last February, warned 49 senators that if they didn't cut the budget by $500 billion, the bond markets would react, as would the stock market. They thought possibly as late as the first or second quarter next year. Now we can go through what's happening in Europe, what that is doing to our interest rates here, and why we're able to borrow so cheaply right now. But we've seen this coming for a long time, as I believe the Treasury and the Federal Reserve has too.
Marc, it seems to me there's just a lot of blame shifting, there's a lot of confusion, but I think maybe an underlying principle, are there people that are lawmakers in the Capitol that really understand the problem? Do they really get it? Are there people that get it?
Well, I'm sad to say that there are really very few. My Senator Tom Coburn is one. Our Congressman from the 5th District, James Lankford, is another. There are few. Most know there's a problem, just like the American public knows there's a problem, but they don't understand what it is or what to do about it. They're getting mixed advice, and they don't know how to make a decision, so there's stalemate. And in this stalemate and inaction, there is great jeopardy for our country and our economy, but our country.
Now, you've likened this to what happened with England, particularly. Maybe we can just talk about that a little bit. England, I think it was 1939.
Well, I actually started in 1933, and the parallel, the similarities are that there was a problem facing the world in the form of evil of Adolf Hitler. There were a lot of people in denial. We don't want to go to war again. We don't want to address this. We don't want to defend this in any way. We don't want to pay a short-term price to fix this problem today. Today, that problem facing the world is global debt and deficit spending. Winston Churchill warned his public. He said, please listen to what the man says. There's no way to wire around this diplomatically. Take him now while he's still inside his borders. And they went into denial, said, well, let some other country handle this first. We're an island. It won't get to us. When somebody else has a problem and we see this is real, we might act.
Right.
By the time it became apparent that what Winston Churchill had been warning them about, it was too late for them to take the action they needed to save themselves, except to go into World War II. Now, that may seem a little dramatic, but the parallels are very similar in that we're in denial now. Oh, we can just kick the can down the road 4 more years. We're not at any real limit. We're not at a point where we can't just keep borrowing for the 5 or 10 years and grow our way out of this. Surely we don't have to pay any price now, and there won't be a greater price to pay later. And by the way, if you got to cut that budget, Dave, cut somebody else's programs. Don't cut mine. In other words, let the French handle it first in that metaphor, if you get my point. And we're at that point now. By 1939, Winston Churchill had said, look, if you don't solve this problem now, it's going to be a great price later. And the great price was 72 million deaths before Hitler shot himself in a bunker.
My goodness.
Now, when we hit what we're going to talk about here in a minute, if we don't deal with this problem, it will deal with us, just like the evil of Adolf Hitler dealt with the world.
Well, I think one of the things we want to make sure that we spend enough time talking about is, Mark, allowing you to put this into terms that people can understand, that can provide talking points. Because a lot of, you had even said today, a lot of bankers, a lot of people that are well-educated have differing opinions, cloudy opinions about this. So talk to us. What are the key concepts? You mentioned unsustainability and a few other terms like the debt wall. Talk to us about the concept.
Let's talk about the concept and where it came from. There's one thing on which we can all agree. Whether you're liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat, a Keynesian economist or disciple of Milton Friedman, the current spending trends of the United States of America and the world are unsustainable. That's what everybody agrees with. Now, what does unsustainability mean? How do you know when you're approaching it? What does it mean to you when it happens, whatever that is? What we have developed is a chart and a graph that I think explains why we had to print money in 2009 through QE1, why we had to print money in 2010 through QE2. We were approaching what I call a debt wall, a point where you can't print or borrow money any longer at an affordable price without destroying your economy. And that debt wall is our attempt to put a definition on the term unsustainable. What does unsustainable mean? It means you hit this wall. What happens when you hit the wall? Interest rates must go up, or you continue to print money through maybe another quantitative easing program like QE3, but it becomes chronic at that point, and at some point you debase your currency. All these things come back to impact the citizens of the United States, either in reduced purchasing power, hyperinflation, less government services, and if not dealt with now, as I said, it will deal with us in a way that's very draconian. So we are putting a definition of unsustainability. We're telling you how to know when we're approaching it, how to avoid it, and then what are the consequences if we don't address this and continue. I had to go back to the historical metaphor of acting like the British until it was too late when they were on the shores of Dunkirk bringing those boys back in rowboats.
Well, let's take the time, Mark, and let's go into it. And I know you brought a couple of charts and some graphs, but I think the ability for us to allow people, as you're getting ready, I think the ability for us to allow you, ladies and gentlemen, to understand some of these concepts for yourself, to be able to distinguish the truth as you're watching the media, to hear some of these key concepts that Mark is talking about that you'll be hearing more of. And Mark, one of the things that you and I had spoke about is that if we think there's some confusion with politics and the media now, it's going to continue to escalate as the elections come closer.
Yes. Well, we all know what the invective nature and the intensity of the debate was on raising the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling was really a point of reference to deal with what I'm getting ready to talk about is world deficits. And how much money do we borrow each year? The debt is one thing we're going to talk about in a minute, but the world deals in terms with sovereign governments of GDP, gross domestic product. That's what that term means. And we're not looking at this on a global basis as much as we should. In the debate of the debt ceiling, you didn't hear much about what's going on in Europe, what's going on in Japan, what's going on in the rest of the world, and how much money is there. And here are the concepts, primarily that I learned from Milton Friedman. You've heard about the U.S. GDP, gross domestic product, being somewhere between $14 and $15 trillion this year that we're in. The world GDP in 2010 was around $60 trillion. Today it's around 61.5. That's what we think the world's GDP is. There are 182 governments in the World Trade Organization. That's an organization where they have all signed a trade treaty, if you will, on how they're going to conduct international trade and how they're going to control their prices and deal with each other in an international trade system. Of those 182 countries, 181 are deficit spending. All governments, developed governments, are in a deficit spending mode. Only China claims that it's not. Now, I've worked in China. I know a little bit about the Chinese economy, and I question exactly what their net revenue is. But let's take them at their word, that they're not deficit spending, and 181 are. The world's GDP of 61.5 trillion or thereabouts will yield somewhere between 9 and 10% of that number can go into sovereign debt in any given year. Now, that GDP I just mentioned is the cash for all services in the world. It's all payrolls, it's all investment, it's all savings, it's all investment in manufacturing and research. It's all cash expenditures. And Milton Friedman had a formula of 10% was the max, somewhere between 9 and 10%. What happens when you hit these ceilings? Interest rates must go up. Now, what is the current interest rate of the United States? Let's just get to that point. The United States, is its last auction, borrowed about $250 billion on the day of the debt ceiling, and they paid 0.25% for it, a quarter point interest. Europe currently, I think the French just bought some at about 0.6%. The reason ours is cheaper is because there's a flight of capital out of Europe into the United States looking for T-bills. Now, we predicted this, Dave, at a MorningStar seminar last February, that this was coming.
That, yes.
That this was coming, that we would be able to borrow for a while because of flight of capital and other parts of the world looking for security of the U.S. Treasury bill. And we thought it might last through September. I'm not sure it's going to last that long now, but it's here now, and we're borrowing at a cheap rate because of the world plight that you saw today in the stock market to scare French banks. And are they going to be able, is the European Central Bank, the ECB, going to be able to support Spanish and primarily Italian bonds? And Italian bonds are what we didn't see coming in February. We thought it was going to be Spain and Portugal and Ireland. This line, these two lines represent 9% and 10% of world GDP. These are actual numbers from the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the UN, up through 2011, where we are now. That's the amount of money available for sovereign, which is government debt. These are the ceiling lines. From 2000 and 2001 up through 2007, before the meltdown in 2008, you can see these lines are cumulative. This is the United States, is the red line. The blue line is Europe. The brown line are the advanced economies with Europe, excluding the U.S., and this line is the total world spending, deficit spending, and every year since 2000, projected through 2012. That's the world's gross spending deficits. The United States is about $2 trillion of that right now. Europe's about 2.5. The rest of the world's about 1, sort of somewhere around 5.5 trillion. Everything was fine until the meltdown. This line represents what happened from 2008 to 2009.
My goodness. This
is a $4 trillion worldwide extraordinary expenditure. Remember TARP? It was 780 some odd billion. Remember the stimulus package of $1 trillion. There was $1 trillion for bank bailouts and GM and other categories. These all kind of mixed together for a period of about 18 months. And there was a structural deficit in the United States at the time, which means a constant year-in, year-out deficit of $1 trillion. Now, these were extraordinary expenditures. If Europe had to do the same thing and spiked this line up above the 9% the world had to give for deficit spending. Now, what happened right here? Do you remember what happened in 2009? This is the first time in the history of the United States that we printed money to pay our bills. It was called QE1 right here. Quantitative easing 1. We printed $600 billion and paid debts with it, some of it through the Federal Reserve, but it was printed capital, first time ever. The excuse was, well, Great Britain did it 6 months earlier and it didn't cause inflation. If you could do this forever, ladies and gentlemen, why wouldn't you just print $14 trillion, which we're going to talk about here in a minute? Well, we know we can't do that. It causes hyperinflation. It cuts your currencies by the amount of money you print. It destroys the middle class, their ability to function and pay their bills. It won't work, or the governments would do it. This right here is the back end of it. This was QE2. We loaned ourselves $600 billion. The Treasury issued it, the Fed picked it up, and the Treasury backed it and went on the Federal Reserve balance sheet. This total was $1.2 trillion the United States of America put into the marketplace to maintain its bills. When you look at this number of world deficit spending, all of this deficit down here, and you add it up, the amount of money that they spent on QE1 was $600 billion, which is almost to the dollar what they had to spend to back that off that blue line. See, when you print the money, it doesn't go on your books as debt. You're basically devaluing your currency. But it's not paying an interest rate, it's money spent and it's gone. That number, when we did the debt wall formula and checked in 2009, it came out perfectly. That's exactly what they did. And QE2 was the back end of this over a period of about 18 months. Now, what this chart shows, and what I hope the American public can understand, and what the congressmen and other senators can understand, we're trying to define unsustainability. And when you hit this point again, what happens and how do you hit it? In 2011, where we are right now, this is where our deficits are for the year. Projected deficits of the world through 2012, this is about July of 2012, takes us back up to the 9%. Now what happens when you hit this point? Interest rates have to go up. What I tell you the borrowing costs were? About quarter percent the last round. The overall average right now is somewhere less than 2% for all federal debt. When the U.S. hits this line, interest rates will go to at least 4, maybe 5%. That doesn't sound like much, but to the U.S. that would be another $600 billion a year to the deficit spending. And to the point of the definition that we've got, when you hit this wall, you can't borrow anymore and you can't print it without costing more money than the money you receive. Now, the difference in this line and this line, remember, this was extraordinary spending. They didn't see this coming. This happened all in a period of months in 2008 when the meltdown was coming. 2008, 2009. At this point, it becomes structural. What do I mean by structural? It means it's constant year in and year out. At this point, you start printing the money, you print it forever. And you can't do it. You can't just print this money forever to back it off this line. These interest rates will go up even if you print the money. The interest rates will go up. And this is what economists that are testifying before Congress now are explaining. And that's what we call the debt wall. And what we've charted on we have a website now we're developing called debtwall.org. And there's a line here that it's the same thing. It's just you put a wall right there and you've hit it. When you go past it, your country's literally in bankruptcy. Now, this is just the United States. We're not being fair to the rest of the world. We have an obligation in the United States of America to manage our currency properly because we are the world's currency. We're not the secondary currency. We're the primary currency. And France and Germany and Great Britain and some of our main trading partners, which is 25% of our GDP, have to pay a higher interest rate when we're taking the oxygen out of the air, to use a line that you've given me. Well, we're attracting the capital because our T-bill is the safest, and now Italy's paying 6%. And their debt to GDP is not much worse than ours. They just don't have the large enough economy to keep borrowing money, so they're at their wall now or approaching it. Greece has hit this wall, ladies and gentlemen. You saw the results of what happened to Greece. Now, Greece is going to survive because the EU, the ECB, is giving them the capital, and they're going through a managed default right now, and some people are getting paid and some aren't, but there's somebody to back them up. When the United States does this, there's nobody to back this system up. This is the world we're talking about here. Now, so this is QE1, QE2, and here's the next wall, and they're already talking about QE3, which would be quantitative easing 3. We don't know what it would be, but it won't solve the problem when it's chronic. Now let's take a moment here and put this in terms that I get asked a lot is, what does this mean to an average individual? But let's see if we can make some sense for us in reference to your family budget. Now these are round numbers. The current U.S. debt is around $14 trillion. That's 14 followed by 12 zeros. It's about 14.3, but so I've left it at that. Let's just take 8 zeros off of it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That leaves you with $1,443,000. We can all relate to that. That's a number that many of us have dealt with in buying a home or something else. The annual budget of the U.S. right now, published budget, is $3.8 trillion. However, given the recent economic numbers, the flat economy, and increased unemployment, I believe the deficit, or the true budget right now for this, is $4 trillion. So take off 8 zeros, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's $40,000. Now that's what the U.S. is spending annually, if this was a household budget. $2 trillion is U.S. income. It's actually about 2.1, but we're around at $2 trillion. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is $20,000. So we have $20,000 in income. We're spending $40,000, and we owe $143,000 to a bank. Yeah. Now, if you crunch this number and you went to the bank and said, I want to borrow $143,000 on $20,000 in income, they legally would have a problem giving it to you, because even not paying tax, which the U.S. government doesn't, the disposable income per month of $20,000 is about just under 50% of the debt payment on this at about 5% interest. They couldn't make the ratios work. You don't have the income to support that debt. But you're also deficit spending. You're spending another $40,000. This is what you're really spending. And so what the government's asking our creditors to do is loan me $14 trillion on this budget. We want to add, by the way, over the next 3 or 4 years, $20,000 a year more to the line of credit, and have a $20 trillion debt before 2020. And we don't know what our income will be, but just trust us. And the only cuts they're willing to make right now are about 1%. So if you look at this, you take this off, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The U.S. deficit is 20,000. And all they're willing to cut out of that is about $200. Now that's out of the deficit. Now, that's out of the deficit. That's all they've proposed. That's all they can come up with, which is, what is that a month? Divide that by 12. Is that $18, $16 a month on a $40,000 budget?
Yeah.
And you expect the markets to believe that at some point all of this is going to come out to a positive number? If we just keep borrowing and printing, somehow this all works out to a positive number? It isn't going to happen. Now, you mentioned then what's going on in Congress. Well, we raised the debt ceiling and now have established, I think it was appointed today, it's called a select committee to make recommendations to Congress on how to further cut the budget by another $200 billion a year for $2 trillion, or about $150 billion for $1.5 trillion over 10 years. One, it's not enough. It's inadequate. But two, there's nothing in the system. I think S&P was right. There's nothing to indicate that this new select committee is going to have any easier time getting past the gridlock on this debate about what to do about it than the last committee did. Only with this further problem, if they don't reach resolution by November 23rd, that's when the select committee has to make its report, and then it's an up or down vote in Congress. If they don't come to conclusions come to compromise on this, and it's something that the Congress can't support, there's automatic cuts in defense and Homeland Security, which I don't agree with. There ought to be some cuts in defense, but the only thing that's holding the world together, the glue that's holding this world together right now, is the presence of the United States of America. What would happen if you were pick a big city, and you knew that there were no police on the street and they weren't coming? There was no presence of any police, and they weren't ever going to be there. Would there be looting? There probably would be. There'd be more crime. There'd be more mischief, for sure. If you pull the United States of America off the world scene, there'll be instant problems in Colombia and Venezuela, India, Pakistan, China, and Taiwan, let alone the Middle East and other problems, areas like that can blow up. What keeps these forces at bay that don't believe are good corporate citizens, in my opinion, are the presence of the United States of America and its strike force and its ability to hold people accountable to world law and world forums. But I digress.
Marc,
the automatic cuts shouldn't be that way. We shouldn't be flipping a coin. We've got to fix this deficit problem. Now, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, all these things have to not just be cut. It's not a matter of cutting, ladies and gentlemen. It's a matter of restructuring and reforming the entire system. Then one last thing, and I'll stop, Dave. What happens when you hit the wall with these numbers? Now, I've told you what the deficits are. What happens when you hit the debt wall? You let the evil take it out of its cage, where it becomes a force of its own reckoning, and it deals with us. Then you have to, at this point, there's only four things you can do. You can print the money. We just talked about why you can't print the money, what that does, inflation in the middle class. You can default, and I'm just not paying it. I'm not paying my world debt. That would be cataclysmic to the world system. It would destroy our trading partners, and then ultimately it would destroy us, and our revenue would drop by 30%. You can borrow the money, which interest rates will go up, and it's not an answer. It might be an answer for 90 days, but ultimately your cost of borrowing is greater than the amount of money you put in your hand, the net value of the money you put in your hand. Or the fourth thing, you can cut your deficit. That's the only option. And there's no easy way out of this. Alan Greenspan was on Meet the Press this Sunday. You could see it in his eyes. He was trying to get the panel to understand these numbers are real, these problems are real. We've been seeing them come for a long time, and it's time to do something about it. And if we don't, it will deal with us. And so then what happens? It's like the World War II example. I hate to keep using it, but it just seems to be so sound to me. The price of not dealing with Hitler when you knew it was a problem,
right,
versus letting him out of his borders and then World War II and the cost of human life. When you hit that wall, you have to cut the budget by 50%. Now remember, look at these numbers. We're spending $4 trillion. We take in $2 trillion. Our deficit is $2 trillion. We're overspending by 100%. So if you had to solve that in a month, where are you going to cut all services in half across the board? 50%. I'm talking about 5% or 10% cuts. 50%. How are you going to do that? And it's not fair to the American people to lead them down this path.
Well, Mark, certainly, ladies and gentlemen, a lot to digest. But the concepts that you're talking about, Mark, I think there's a way that they're bringing them, at least in my mind, to a point where I can articulate them, use some talking points. As we're looking at our audience, people that are watching what's happening, I believe you're bringing clarity to the structure of what's behind. You've been saying this for a while. I believe you're gaining great credibility. A couple of questions that I have. You had worked through some times of, I feel, significant crisis with the Reagan administration. What was it behind the scene that allowed that administration to face they had some significant obstacles?
Well, it's a great question. I'll give you one example. It's leadership. It's conviction to principle, sticking to those principles under all pressure, under all stress, under all circumstances. For example, the few times I was around these meetings, there'd be times Ronald Reagan would go to bed at night and he'd get up at 9 o'clock in the morning. We didn't start staff meetings at 6 a.m. Not that I was in all those staff meetings, but the guys that dealt with the world issues would struggle all night long. Oh, what are we going to do about this? Or what are we going to do about this? Now, this I know is again a metaphor, but here's how it would work. Someone would have an idea on what direction we're supposed to go the next morning. They put their hand on it. Somebody else put their hand on top of that compass and turn it a little bit this way. And there'd be 4 or 5 hands on top of it. There's economics, problems in the Middle East, military problems, state problems, state rights, whatever it was. And Reagan would come in and say, what's the situation? He'd get his briefing. And he had this intercompass, that's why I use a compass. He'd say, everybody take their hands off the compass. He'd go, no, Mr. President, we've got it all figured out here. We've talked to everybody we need to talk to, and we've turned, it's that way. He said, no, just everybody take their hands off the compass. Do it. You take your hands off, and it would go back to true north. He'd say, no, we're going that way.
Oh, great.
And true north to him was the critical decision every day. It wasn't about what direction we're going to go. It was how you're going to get there, rather than trying to wire around all this stuff as Europe did during World War II. He always dealt with it, Dave. He always dealt with it.
A couple of resources I want to talk about a little bit. First of all, you'd heard Mark mention you can watch this unfold. I encourage you to register. You can be online at, let me just make sure I've got that right, debtwall.org, debtwall.org, or nuttle.com. And you can watch the debt wall as Mark puts it in place. You'll actually be able to see this ticking down, and as things change, you'll have updates. But I think gone are the days for all of us. We're in this together, and we have to understand these times. We have to face up to the critical nature of where we're at. And for us here, Marc has written an incredible book, Moment of Truth, and we have this available with us today. And Marc, going back, we'd also like to. Marc spoke at the Oak Initiative, and he talked about QE2 and what was going to happen with Fed economics. Moment of Truth, Marc Nuttle, and also QE2 Fed economics. Both of them about $49, but today $25, and that includes the shipping. So we'll ship them right to you. As many as Marc can autograph while he's still here. If you'd like, and you like that quickly, we'll take them in any order that we get them, but you may get an autographed copy from Marc. And you can call 1-888-778-7141, and we'll make that available to you. And again, debtwall.org. Marc, I want to talk a little bit about what you've termed the American experiment and the exceptionalism of America, why that's under attack, why is there a rewriting of the history, why is there a rage against our foundation? So first of all, as you've looked at it, you've studied it consistently, are we the Christian nation founded on Christian principles that people believe we were? As you've looked back in history, were we founded on those unwavering Christian principles?
Yes. There's no question. There's no question that the philosophy at the time was Judeo-Christian values and principles, but more than that, Dave. Leading up to the Revolutionary War, the ministers at the time who preached these freedoms. They preached the role of government in our lives and what was the proper biblical worldview and how government should be administered in relationship to human nature and human spirit. That's what led to that's what led maybe the Declaration of Independence. The American experiment, what I call American exceptionalism, it was the first country founded in the history of the world that God is sovereign over man and man is sovereign over government.
Now say that again. Say that again. The first country
in the history of the world, other than in the Old Testament, ancient Israel possibly, which is a different set of circumstances, the first country established, gained its independence, and drafted a constitution on the fundamental principle that God is sovereign over man and man is sovereign over government. Now what does that mean? It means that you get your direct rights from God. The government here is here to facilitate. Why was that so revolutionary? Why did de Tocqueville write about this? Why did he come here and say, this is really different, and will it make it? And will Americans, and we're at this point in history, by the way, we're in the 1830s when he was touring here trying to decide what this great American experiment was, would Americans continue to vote for politicians who said, I can give you everything you want without you having to pay for it forever? Would they vote for that? Which was put them in the same situation of slavery they thought they were with the king, who then was always managing the resources of their country for hopefully their well-being. But first country we're in that established under its principles and stated your rights are inalienable and they come from God. God is sovereign over man and man is sovereign over government. But the second, what does that mean? It means that your birth is not your destiny. It's the first country in the history of the world where you weren't born into a tribe, you weren't born into a station in life, you weren't born into a hereditary title. You were born, and when you were born, that child next to you in the crib was absolutely equal to you in your state of life. Now, sure, you can talk about slavery and other things that were finally we eliminated in the United States, but under the principles of the Declaration of Independence in our Constitution, you were not born into a station of life, and your birth was not your destiny in the United States. That was exceptional to Europe or any other country at the time, and many of our problems in the world today are still a system wherein you are born into privilege, or you are born into a tribe like in the Middle East, and you can't get outside of the economics of that particular tribal sovereignty. It's part of the system of that tribal system. Not in the United States of America. We are a threat. Our freedom is a threat to many countries because Birth is not destiny. You can't control. Humans aren't to be controlled. They get their rights from God, not from other men or from government. And therein, those who control other people in their system are threatened by that and do not want us to succeed.
Now, you talked about a little bit of our responsibility as the world's currency, but also talk a little bit about our responsibility to steward that American experiment.
I do not believe that the United States of America was established by accident. I believe that it was ordained. I believe that God had his hand in it. I believe that the Federalist Papers in themselves, the argument for a new government, was a miracle. I mean, you had people in the South, in the Carolinas, that were so afraid of coming to New York, they would write their last will and testament before they went to the Continental Congress, so they weren't sure they weren't going to get captured and killed. I mean, there was that much fear among the colonies. Yet, they entered into this document called the Declaration of Independence, entered into a War of Independence, and entered into a constitution based upon there's more strength together than we are separate, based upon God is sovereign over man and man is sovereign over government. We'll trust in that faith. I mean, it was a miracle. Now, what does that mean? I believe that everything that the Lord has done in his creation was in preparation for you and I to be in his kingdom. He's teaching us how to live in his kingdom. We've learned something from every government that's ever been in existence, from ancient Egypt to Greece to Rome, the Holy Roman Empire to Europe, the United States, and everything in between. You learn something good and something bad in ancient Israel about what's good and bad about governments. All the way back to Saul and whether you want a king or not. And all of those stories, remember. You learn something good and bad about every sequence of American history and government application to the human spirit and your relationship with God. I believe the United States was established for the purpose of saying, of explaining this, that freedom is more important than men controlling other men in this system of things. Now, given that, we have a responsibility, not only just to that freedom, but to that ideal. Look, we are the largest economy in the world, far larger than China. People think China's moving on us, but they're still not half of what we are in GDP. We consume 50% of the world's products. We produce 25 to 30% of the world's GDP, and we do it through less regulation and less restriction and no birth by destiny than any other country in the world. Now, if the United States does not manage its economy and its currency, the world's currency, and we cause any kind of a major default in the world, there is no other country positioned to take up the role of freedom. When the Pilgrims came here in the 1600s, they didn't come here looking for more government. There wasn't any. They landed at Plymouth Rock and started clearing trees. Now, it was their safe harbor, their place to go to be free with God as they saw fit. And that Mayflower Compact was a religious document, and anybody who says it wasn't, I'll argue that with my legal peers who say that it wasn't. But still, they came here for religious freedom. Where would you go today? What safe harbor could you sail into today? Where could you take your family today if the government was doing something to you that was so egregious that you thought it violated your right as a man to be in charge of your family as you saw fit, or with your wife to do what you saw fit for your family and you wanted to leave? Where would you go?
I don't believe there's a place.
There's not another place. And there's not another place now in a stable world, and we mismanage this. The world has nowhere to go but to as Reagan said, don't let us ever go to 1,000 years of darkness, which is world socialism. That's a direct Reagan quote.
Now, Mark, I had the privilege of hearing a story that you told because, spending some time in Europe this summer with my family and seeing that there are many steps further down the road to socialism, at least in my opinion, my limited travels. And yet you hear socialist talk and you see underpinnings of it here in the U.S., and it just seems that it cannot work. But I wanted you to recant, if you can tell the story about an incredible moment that you had representing Milton Friedman for the Senate and talking with Mr. Kenny. I think that's just an amazing insight to...
I did have the undeserved privilege to represent Milton Friedman at one time. I traveled with him around the country at the time we were talking about and trying to advocate a balanced budget constitutional amendment for the federal government. It was the only way that he saw avoiding that debt ceiling. He saw this coming in the 70s. Is that right? He saw this happening, and he said, if we don't get control of this legally, they're going to bust that ceiling, and this is the position we're going to be in. It was the position he thought Japan was headed, and he thinks Japan approached this actually in the 80s and 90s. Now we know that they did. He was a brilliant man. By the way, one thing that he did tell me that I felt an obligation to pursue and to relate to every elected official that I can. And part of what drove this research on what is the definition of unsustainability. After traveling with him for some time, and this is about a 2-week trip in small planes, and he was a professor, by vocation, and a politician by advocation. And he would lecture me on these planes, actually give me pop quizzes and stuff. It was unmerciful, actually. I'd get off the plane just bruised. I'd climb off the plane and say, oh, no more.
What an incredible experience.
But what a great experience. He was just a great guy and a funny guy. But I remember we were on tarmac in New Hampshire at 2 o'clock in the morning during a presidential cycle, and he grabbed my lapels and he said, listen, I feel compelled to tell you this, and you've got to carry this message. If you're going to be involved in public policy, you have to make people understand this. If the king in the Middle Ages, when he controlled the land, he had serfs and slaves, all rents. He could print money, and his word was law, and he could change it with a breath. What makes you think if he couldn't spend his way and borrow his way out of trouble in the Middle Ages, that a government can do it today?
Wow.
And that's always stuck with me. Now,
Wow.
But to your question, we're explaining some of this same concept, he's testifying, and I'm his counsel, in front of the Senate Budget Committee.
Historic.
And Judiciary Committee,
Yeah.
which Ted Kennedy was the chair at the time. And the issue is a balanced budget constitutional amendment. And he's having this debate with Senator Kennedy. I can remember as a young lawyer, we're sitting there, the bench seemed 10 stories tall. But it's an imposing bench. And we're sitting at the witness table, and Senator Kennedy is losing this battle badly, or losing this debate badly, as would anybody did with Milton Friedman. And finally, he's not even, it's kind of like the debate today. Well, we just have to keep spending. Well, there's just no other recourse. And if we don't keep spending, jobs will be lost, and the economy will lose its buoyancy, what little there is, and we're going in the tank. And so, but there's a wall. There's a point where you can't borrow and spend anymore. Have you ever considered cutting the deficit? Getting back within our means, restructuring government programs, living by proper biblical principles, helping each other, the church having a greater role. I mean, all the things that we could talk about and should. Oh, no, we can't address that. We just have to tax more and keep spending as a percent of GDP. At a point, Milton Friedman looked at Senator Kennedy and said, Senator, socialism hasn't worked in 6,000 years of recorded history. When are you going to give up on it? And I can remember the cameras are rolling, and I'm sitting there going, what's his reaction to this going to be? And I can remember him coming up on his knuckles on that bench. I could see the blood rising in his neck. He peered down over to Dr. Friedman and said, Dr. Friedman, socialism hasn't worked in 6,000 years of recorded history because it didn't have me to run it. Mm. In other words, they won't give up on it. It hasn't worked in 6,000 years. The other thing that's maddening to me in this debate, Dave, is you hear about, okay, we're going to cut $1 trillion, $100 billion a year for 10 years, or we're going to cut 2.3, or the Gang of Six, 3.4, or what was supposed to be the grand deal between Speaker Boehner and the president, 4.1. Based on what? What number? What plan? What wall? If it doesn't matter, what difference does it matter if you cut $4 trillion or $1 trillion? If you were running a business and you had to cut, your numbers were like, there's your household. Let's try to put this in household numbers.
Right.
And these are your household numbers. Well, you'd start working with the number, well, I'm spending $40,000 and I make 20 and I'm $143,000 in debt. I need to cut this number. To what? To make your payments equal to what the bank and you can support on $20,000 in income. Or if you're going to increase the revenue, which is what's going to be the debate in this select committee, okay, well, where's it going to come from? It comes from some other source, and it ultimately hurts your ability to raise this kind of money. I mean, there's a cause and effect in economics. You raise taxes, there's a cause to the economy. There's an effect to the economy. You keep borrowing like this, there's an effect on interest rates, which has an effect on the economy. But what drives me nuts, I'm going to erase this if I can, I'll just erase this part of it, is no one is talking about, I want to cut X, because it means a result in this, and we're solvent in 6 years. There's no formula. There's no Keynesian out there. Not Paul Krugman from the New York Times. Nobody is telling you how this works. What we're going to tell you, though, with this debt wall is we're going to give you a number. And I don't have that number with me tonight. We have that number. I think it's 5.4 trillion. 5.4 trillion is how much money the world has in its current GDP. And I'm giving the world growth right now. And I'm not sure that we've got that much growth in the world economy. But that's how much money all governments can borrow. And we are on a projection of 181 governments right now to borrow 6.3 trillion. These lines cross, and you hit a debt wall, and it goes like this. And when you get past this wall, you're out here in this area, you've either got to pay higher interest rates or print the money. Now, this is a real number. This is a real plan. And you can say, okay, there's the wall. That's all we got. That's all the world can give us under current structure. Now, how much do you cut? And then that makes sense. Then you can explain to the American people, we have to cut the deficit by 500 billion. Why? Why not 400 billion? Because of this number. And so what we'll do is put a debt clock up with this that shows how, you've seen these debt clocks like in New York Times Square, 14 trillion and counting. And the right-hand side of the clock spinning so fast you can't read it. And then in the middle, it's going up 100,000 every few seconds and 1 million every 3 minutes. And you've seen those clocks.
Right.
And you look at the clock, what does it mean? You know, what does it mean to me? What does it mean to my ability to pay my bills, grow my business, keep my job, support my family, put food on the table, save for college for my kids? How does it impact all that? You can't tell it. We'll put a clock up that is on by minute on current projections, producing this number, 6.3 trillion. This clock will be out here starting around 2 trillion, and these numbers will be turning. But this is a constant number. Now you can compare this deficit clock to a real number, and I'll give you how many days we are till we get there. And right now we've got it set on about July 2012. We can adjust this on a daily basis based on interest rates. We can adjust it weekly based upon unemployment rates. We can adjust it quarterly based upon GDP projections, and we will. If this economy out here, this is a percent of 61 trillion that would be up here someplace. If the economy grows at 5%, which the IMF would like to project, well, then this goes up. You've got more revenue, the deficit's less, you move the wall out. Then we don't hit it in 2012, it's 2013, somewhere around 2016 when everybody my age retires and Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare kick in, you're back to the line, but not for a while. But these are the current numbers of the last quarter. This is the line we're on. There's nothing out there, by the way. Alan Greenspan on Meet the Press, again, just this last Sunday, when asked, are we going back into a recession? He says, I don't know. He said, it depends upon Europe. I mean, it's out of our control right now because we're not controlling our deficits. Well, what's the story from Europe today? French banks are under siege. They say it's not true. We'll see what the market does tomorrow. But I can tell you that the Italian bond market is a real problem for them. And only the French and the Germans can pick it up. There's only so much they can do. I'm saying that these are generous lines. Guess what I'm saying? This number is real, but I'll adjust it. If the GDP goes up, this number goes down. I mean, it's adjustable with those the lines we're on. But to just say I'm going to cut it, and that this is an ideological debate of how much government's okay versus how much government's not okay, and that our lives go on and we won't know for 25 years how it impacted us, is folly. It's not fair to the American people not to give them the facts so they see where we are and what's coming. So when they hit the wall and they wake up one night and say, how in the world did that happen? Now at least they'll know.
Right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we want to take some time and bring this to somewhat of a practical level. I know a lot of people watching us are, understanding maybe perhaps for the first time, and for me, it's one of the clearest presentations I've seen. And again, Marc Nuttle with us. You can go on to debtwall.org. We have these two resources today. QE2 Fed Economics by Marc Nuttle, the DVD, and A Moment of Truth, and we'll have a limited number of these. It'll be signed by Marc. I really appreciate him coming and being with us. I think both of these together rate around $49, and tonight you can get them $25 for both, and that includes shipping, and you can call us at 1-888-778-7141. That's 888 778-7141. And I want to turn the corner and talk about some practicalities. Mark, we've got families out there that are watching us. They've been watching, I'm sure, many people watching what's happening to their 401k and their retirement plan. But give us some Christian perspective. What should people be concerned about? What are the important factors right now?
Well, number one, understand the situation. Everybody get their head out of the sand and listen to the leaders that will talk to you. The numbers are unsustainable. We have to do something about it. We have to do something about it now. Support any caucus, dialogue, elected official that you can in the next 60, 90 days as this select committee begins its work on its recommendations. And make sure that we do something and that we do something to control this. Now, it's going to require a lot more than 1.5 trillion over 10 years, 150 billion a month to solve this problem. Well, not 150 billion a month, I'm sorry, 150 billion a year to solve this problem. Be aware of it. Now, then think through what you can do. First, what do you do for yourself? You support anybody who wants to talk about this, and you take 10 people in your sphere of influence and you explain this to them. So you've got to take this and understand 1, 2, 3. Do you understand that there's just so much money you can borrow? Would you agree with that? Well, that makes sense. Well, how do you know when you've hit it? Well, it's something like this. And it happened in 2009. Oh, and I didn't. I'm sorry, I forgot the debt wall index. The formula we used to reach this, first we did the research on what was the actual expenditures, what was the GDP at the time, and what percents were they spending. The formula for the debt wall index, which is how many days we have left before we hit the wall, is the world GDP times the formula, 9 or 10%, minus world sovereign deficits, which are these lines. You add these up, you subtract it from this, and when that equation is 0 or negative, you're at the wall. It's a real simple formula, it's a real simple exercise, and it basically says and shows what Milton Friedman proved through his research. There's a limit to what you can borrow without interest rates, without paying more money. Now, by the way, just so I can course correct, there is more money in the world than this. There's $140 trillion of liquidity in the world stock markets. I mean, you could go get more money, but you have to pay something for it. Rates have to go up. There's a cause and effect to printing money and a cause and effect to borrowing, and that's what this is. And we're at a point, why do you talk about the debt? Well, the debt is so large that you can't pay high interest rates. If we were out of debt, we could run these deficits for a while, but we're not. We're at 100% debt to GDP, 14 trillion in debt and change, and 14 trillion in GDP and change. So understand the equations. It's not that difficult, or help myself and others understand it.
And what do people do with their families? What priority should we have? How do we bring the kingdom into this?
Well, first, as far as yourself, of course, manage your debts as best you can and get out of debt. I know you've been told that, take a Dave Ramsey course and do some other things that are important for your own personal finances. Have the ability to support yourself no matter what for, I would say, 6 weeks. There may be some adjustments. There's some things the world can do we won't talk about tonight. The G20 could call a meeting and print some money and buy 6 months and move this debt wall out. But there's a higher price to pay. It's not a solution. It's like taking cocaine to get over a cocaine headache. It'll buy you a little bit of time, but the next one's a lot worse. But be prepared to be able to support yourself under any circumstances for about 6 weeks. Now, when I get asked a lot about, okay, what do I do with my personal money? My answer is, well, there are financial planners who'll tell you more than I better what to do, and I don't want to talk about that. But what I do want to talk to you about is this. I believe that there's going to be some pain coming and a lot of people looking for answers. And as Christians, our obligation is to provide hope, love, compassion, and
That's right.
a safety net for the kingdom. In other words, I think a great harvest is coming. And I think that we need to think in terms of how do we maximize the harvest? How do we make with what we have as universal as we can to help the most people to find hope and salvation? Now, when this occurs, and you think about, okay, what church I go to, what can my church do? Then think in terms of how you're going to use your money in the short term. I think the Lord expects us to trust Him each and every day, one day at a time, one step at a time, one stone at a time. Not 20 years about what I do about my pension or my health care. Well, if you're not sick today, don't worry about it. We'll all take care of each other the next year. I know that sounds New Testament maybe, but what do you do with your money to maximize the harvest? That would be my suggestion. But that's partly taking care of yourself and your family, and you have to do that before you can help somebody else.
And just in our closing minutes, as we have Marc with us, one thing I want to mention is that, Marc, I believe you are on the executive committee of the Oak Initiative, and you can find out more about the Oak Initiative by going to theoakinitiative.org, and you can see Marc's progress there with the Oak Initiative and what the Oak Initiative is doing. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes.
And
You are.
again, we have some the resource that we mentioned, $25 for the QE2 and Marc Nuttle's book, Moment of Truth, and that's 1-888-778-7141. We've got a number of things coming up here. I just want to mention we have an advanced prophetic conference. I think more than ever it is important for us to learn to hear from God. You say, well, Dave, I do hear from God. Well, let's hear more clearly. Let's invest in our own personal development. Advanced prophetic conference, incredible team. Rick Joyner, Larry Randolph, and Bobby Connor will be here at Heritage. Pre-registration is only $55, $75 at the door. I'm not using this forum to promote this event, but I just want to tell you about this. An incredible time coming up. And you can call 877-446-3836 to register, or you can go to MorningStarMinistries.org. We have a Kingdom Business Conference coming up on November 3rd through the 5th. Rick Joyner, Lance Wallnow, Gene Strite, Dick Fessler, Bruce Cook, and myself, an incredible panel. The prophetic edge and strategic focus in your business. And we're not sure what things are going to look like by November 3rd through 5th. But again, you can use that same number, 877-446-3836, or MorningStarMinistries.org to register for that. And you can keep track of Marc Nuttle and the Debt Wall at debtwall.org or nuttle.com. Marc, just in the couple of minutes that we have, closing reminders, nuggets, things that people can take with them, and then we'll just save a few minutes. We'll pray for our audience, and just a couple of quick keywords that people can remember while they're here.
Well, first, I believe that the public and your peers and your associates know something's wrong, and they instinctively know we're on the wrong track, and we have to do something to correct the track we're on for ourselves, but also for our children in the future. Go out boldly with confidence when you talk about this. People will listen if you give them the straight facts and talk about it with confidence. That look, this is Physics 101, Economic Physics 101, and here's what it means. You'll be surprised at the response you get, because it's if you tell the truth and you're clear and you're using proper biblical principles, people will find that they're wired to hear that, and they're wired for those solutions. That's number one. Number two is have faith. Let's look at this as a joyous time. With what's coming and the harvest that's coming, this is why we're here. We're here to be the salt and light of the earth. And I encourage you to do that, to do it with excitement. These are going to be great times with God as our guide.
Well, Marc, it'd be a privilege if you could pray for us, pray for our people, and the viewers that are watching us. We'd greatly appreciate your prayers.
I'd love to, Dave. Father in heaven, we call on you right now in your presence in our lives. We know you're in charge of all circumstances, and that you give us these circumstances so that we can learn by character and by experience how to be better servants to you and citizens of your kingdom, which is what we want. We want to live with you forever in your kingdom with you in heaven. Now, Father, please guide us, give us strength, give us confidence, help us to turn to you, give us the faith, and help us with our faith that we need to see this through, and help us to be the salt and light that you designed for us to be, to bring as many people to the light as possible, to maximize this harvest that's coming so that we can be in our actions, glorifying you. Now, Father, please be with us. We trust in you. We accept your Son as we pray through our Son to you, and we ask you, Father, in Jesus' name, to be everything for us that we know you can be, to keep your promises. Thank you for everything. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you for joining us. Again, ladies and gentlemen, Marc Nuttle. Marc, thanks again for being here.
Good.
And we hope we'll see you soon. We really appreciate your support here. Thank you.